Well, it's March, and that means it's time to start some seeds. Today I'm going to be starting my tomato seeds. To me, tomatoes are the gateway garden vegetable. When you're first starting to garden, it's a great vegetable to grow. Actually, technically it's a fruit because it comes from the flower. They're easy to grow, there's a huge variety, and they taste way better than any store-bought tomato. A little confession is I don't even like fresh tomatoes, but I grow them for my family, and they are really easy to preserve in multiple different ways to have throughout the year. And then you can make tomato sauces and tomato powders, and sky's the limit. So now before we start our tomatoes, one thing you need to know is that there's two different types of tomatoes, a determinate tomato and an indeterminate tomato. The difference being a determinate tomato is more of a bush style, it doesn't grow as tall, and it will set its flowers and fruit in one time. Now, an indeterminate tomato is more of a vine. It keeps growing indeterminately, and it will keep setting fruit and flowers as long as you keep picking them and the conditions are right, it doesn't freeze. Where I'm at in a zone 3, I have 124 growing days. The indeterminates really are kind of a determinate for me because they don't have time to keep producing for 50 days. I kind of get, into July and August, and then that's all for my tomatoes. Your second thing to know is your days to maturity. This is how long it takes the plant to get to the mature stage when it will start producing fruit. For tomatoes, these can range anywhere from 45 days to over 100 days. For example, I have my little tiny Tims here, which are 45 to 55 days. Super quick, super little small plant, really easy to grow in a container. Another tomato I'm growing this year is the Aunt Ruby's German green tomato. Now these take 95 days to harvest, so these will take a lot longer than the little tiny Tims. So some people will ask, well, if it only takes 45 to 55 days to maturity and you have 124 growing days, well, why can't you just plant it right in the ground? The thing is, on a lot of these packets, you'll notice it says days from transplant. So they'll say start 6 to 8 weeks early. You start them there, and then once you transplant it, that's when those 60, 70, 80 days start counting. As well as those days are ideal days. So if you have cold temperatures, they won't mature as fast. If you have ideal temperatures, they could mature sooner. Also, tomatoes are a heat-loving plant. So they will grow best in July and August when you have your hottest days. We should start our tomato plant 6 to 8 weeks before our average last frost date. Again, it's going to range. If you have a lot of space inside, lots of good lights, you can start them 10 weeks. If you don't have a lot of space, 4 weeks type thing. So it's going to depend on your setup, but 6 to 8 weeks is a good average. We need to pick the right size container. We wouldn't want to start a little tomato seed in a big container like this because it's going to be hard to water it. If you water this whole thing, it's going to be too damp. So it's better off to start in a smaller container. This size is okay too. So what we're going to do is once it gets to a certain size, we're going to transplant it up because tomatoes can be transplanted very easily. They root very, very easily. The stem of a tomato has got little hairs on it, and those are all actually will form roots. So when we go to transplant our tomatoes, we're going to bury them a little bit deeper, bury the stem, and that's going to give us even stronger and more roots. Last year I grew indeterminate tomatoes, big vines. I did not stake them. What they did is they fell over, and every time they'd fall over, they rooted into the ground and basically grew up another tomato plant. So we're just going to fill our container with pre-dampened soil, and you want it loosely packed. I'm using just peat moss and perlite. You want a really light, fluffy soil. Most seed starting and potting mixes you get at the store will be fine. Okay, so then we're going to get our seeds out. A good trick with seeds is you want to plant them 2 times as deep as they are wide. So tomato seeds planted about 1/8 to 1/4 inch deep. You can either put the seeds on the soil and push it in, or poke the hole and drop it in first, whatever works best for you. I like to plant 2 seeds per cell, because that way if one doesn't sprout, the other one will. If both sprout, you can separate them after and you have 2 tomato plants. Then you just want to cover them up gently. So once you have everything planted, we're going to give it a little bit of a spritz with our spray bottle of water. This way the seed doesn't get washed down, but you make sure that it gets wet because that's what's going to trigger it to start growing. Then we can put our dome on, or you can just cover it with plastic wrap. and wait for them to germinate. Tomatoes are a heat-loving plant, so they like heat to germinate. Once they sprout, they also like a lot of light. So I would only suggest starting these indoors if you have a good light for them. Where I'm at, they'll get too tall and spindly to grow them in a window. Once these get to a certain size, we're going to pot them up. We're going to put them in bigger pots, usually in about 2 to 4 weeks, and then they'll grow in those pots until I'm ready to put them outside. Be sure to subscribe so that you can see the follow-ups as these tomatoes grow this year. See you next time.